So we're good? Okay. So thanks everybody for coming to our engineering and the environment. So it's a discussion exploring how engineering is affecting our environment, the inherent dilemmas in engineering innovation and the challenges that creates for our climate. So our speakers are Tim Simmons,
hello,
far right, as it were, who's an artist, uses photography and film to explore themes of time, motion and place. And Simon Dowson, the Managing Director of Delta Motorsport, who I'll let you introduce yourself shortly because I think you'll do a better job than me. So just a bit of an introduction to the event. So it's a little bit different to our usual discussion events. We've covered, because there's a lot of new people in the audience tonight, we've covered a lot of areas over the past 5 or so years, art and something, all kinds of things, art and satellites, art and football, art and autism. Usually the speakers haven't met, and we try and keep it that way, so the discussion is kind of live and it happens with everybody. In this case it's a little bit different because Tim's been artist in residence effectively 5 days based at Delta Motorsport, part of it's a project we did called Artwork Placement, which saw 5 artists placed in 5 businesses across Northamptonshire. So a lot of those interesting conversations that Tim and Simon have had have happened. So tonight we wanted to share that with a wider audience because we thought it was quite valuable to do so. So typically I would say, okay, over to the artists to introduce themselves, but I think in this instance, if we could start with you, Simon, to tell us a little bit about yourself and Delta, and then we'll come back to Tim and his work later on, and then perhaps we can talk a bit about your experience with Delta.
Yeah, okay. So, just to give you a bit of background to where we are. So you're obviously on Silverstone Circuit. The area where we are now is classed as Silverstone Park, which is a technology park, which is run by a company called MEPC. So they're responsible for a lot of the land outside the sort of pay line to the circuit. And they're really developing this area as an innovation zone for companies a bit like Delta to develop and grow their business. Where we are right now is the innovation centre, so this is really mainly for incubator-based businesses, so early stage startups maybe use this as a platform to work from, so small offices with a managed reception area. And then behind us is the Hexagon Metrology suite. So for instance, this provides state-of-the-art inspection facilities for people that are on site and off site. So Delta subscribes to Hexagon. So when we have parts that need inspecting, we bring them here. We've got all access to the latest kit and equipment. They have inspectors on site. So it's a good facility to use. And that's just an example of how MEPC are developing the site. So small companies like ours have the opportunity to get access to state-of-the-art facilities at a more manageable cost than we would do ourselves. In terms of Delta Motorsport, don't be fooled by the name. When we first started off back in 2005, a lot of our work was motorsport orientated. And then back in 2009, we started looking into electrification of road vehicles in a lot more detail. And that's really the mainstay of our business now, is around battery systems, new electric drivetrains, powertrain integrations, control systems, a lot more than the motorsport element, which, although it is high tech from the outside, it's actually, in terms of regulations, quite stale. So the opportunities to innovate and create new products is fairly limited. So within the automotive space at the moment, with especially the low carbon agenda set out, it's a great place to do things.
Great, okay. Tim, do you want to have a...
Yes, I was interested to be paired with Delta because I'd not that long ago finished an MA, and I'd explored ideas about latitude, speed of rotation and so on within my projects, and I thought I could bring some of that to bear working with Simon. And I think it's probably easy if I explain some of those initial thoughts that I did on my MA, and I have a chart here for that very purpose. So I started to try and think about time. So all around us, you could sort of take a measurement and say, well, how much time is that? And you can start to work that out when you look at the world. So if this is the equator of the world, at the equator, we go approximately 1,000 miles an hour, and at the pole, 0. So along that line there, it's possible to find out at your latitude how fast you're rotating. So where I live in North Norfolk, it's about 628 miles an hour. And there's a reason for all this, which I'm coming to. So I'll try and go slowly. I don't know. I get into this very much. So if this is a part of the globe, again, this is the equator. Where it's wider or where it's narrower, here you've got to move faster to cover the same time. It's a bit like if you had a rope and you chose a city near the equator and you tied a knot at one end, and then somewhere else along that rope you tied a knot and it was Paris or something, and you spun it like this, the equator is going to go faster, obviously, than Paris. This is what this demonstrates. So then I got into thinking, if this was a line of latitude, and this was actually 1 mile, if I chose to put 2 lights a mile apart, I could represent the speed or the time that it took to go that mile by having 2 flashing lights. So the duration between that flashing was the time it took to go the mile. So this would change. If I moved nearer the pole, it would be shorter and longer and so on, depending how you do it. So for my MA, for my final piece, I was in America talking to a scientist who was a friend, and he asked me over breakfast one day about the speed of rotation at the equator. So you think he would know, wouldn't you? Anyway, I told him 1,000 miles an hour, and he said, well, that's amazing because the speed of sound is slower than the speed at the equator. So the speed of sound is about 760 miles an hour. So that meant on the curve somewhere between the equator and the pole, we would be rotating at exactly the same speed as the speed of sound. So that throws into question that this is Earth rotating as it does, that if you were to shout in the direction of rotation, are you going to double the speed? Because you're adding the speed of sound, or if you went the other way, does it cancel it out? I mean, it doesn't quite work like that, obviously, but so I produced a video for my master's that was actually, I went to that latitude, 42.97, that runs through the Pyrenees, and I had somebody walking through that zone, and the soundtrack on it stopped as they went through that area and so on to demonstrate that fact. But just before we get on to the other reason why we're here, this is the last thing to talk about. Another project I've done last year was called 6 Months. And it was the idea that if you go outside on a blue sky or cloudy sky and you cannot see the stars, you can if you go back 6 months later to exactly that place. So say you were there midday and you went back 6 months later at midnight, the stars you see at night would be the stars you would have seen. And that is demonstrated here because this is an annual cycle. This is 6 months apart, these two. During the day from that spot, the sun is lighting it. You take it to this side and you're looking into the space. So hopefully that was, no more, are there? No. So hopefully that would give an idea about why I was interested to work with Simon on the project. There we are.
Okay, so I mean, I think it's interesting the 5 businesses that we've worked with, that once one business signed up, it was easier to sell to the other businesses. But I'm interested because I think it says a lot about the businesses, and they're quite open-minded and creative, that they'd have an artist before you've met him. He's lovely, but what interested you in having him with you?
For us, it's, we've got to be creative in what we do. We've got to look at other people's viewpoints beyond, as a group of engineers, sometimes you can be a little bit isolated, a bit insular. So it's better to open your reach, understand different views, and certainly from an artist's perspective, to look at the way we operate as a business and maybe help us with some of our creativity and forward thinking.
We did
try and bring that in, didn't we?
Yeah. We did talk at one point about what is the attraction of cars to people nowadays.
Yeah.
Why, and I was thinking back to when I had my first car when I was 18, and the first thing I did was sort of strip the engine out, put in a bigger engine, and it didn't go any faster. It was just something I did, and so I bonded with cars early on, I suppose, in a way. And I used to race go-karts as a teenager, and so I was curious about today what is the use of cars to them, and what the idea of ownership, really, because I suppose in my time there was a sense of ownership, whereas nowadays, without being too obvious, it's quite a throwaway society with phones and everything else, and I think we're getting to that point with cars. So it's trying to understand why people would be interested in cars. I have a niece in Los Angeles who recently took delivery of a Tesla, and they waited at least 18 months to get their car, and they couldn't wait to get it, and it was just going to be this wonderful thing. And I was trying to imagine getting excited about any other car really that much, that you'd be prepared to wait 18 months and to be that excited about it. So were they buying into the technology because it meant something to them? Was it just a cool thing to have in LA? Or was it cheaper to run? I mean, there's quite a few things there, but this is something we talked about, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I think you told me earlier that you, yourself, just got yourself one.
Yeah. So because of the work that we do in electric vehicles, obviously we feel that we need to be, my business partner, he has a BMW i3, so it's a range extended electric vehicle, has had for the last 3 years, and Tesla is still the premium brand, leading the way in terms of technology for electric vehicles. So, we felt that we needed to have something in the business, mainly as an educational tool for ourselves to understand how they were operating the vehicles versus how we would. So,
Is it the 3?
it's the Model S, so the bigger version.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've
So, and
never
they're
been in one.
becoming more common. Lots of people are obviously say, "Oh, it must be wonderful. It's amazing."
Mm.
It's a car, really, but it's nice, smooth, relaxing. It's a bit strange if you have to do almost like a Control-Alt-Delete to restart it sometimes, versus turning the key off and turning it on. But yeah, none of that anymore. But yeah, I mean it's convenient, but there's then the challenges in terms of charging infrastructure, range anxiety, all these modern day things that are a problem. I've guilty of it myself when I've come out of work and gone, I was supposed to plug in and I didn't. So, how does that work? So,
well, I think we started when we were talking, just going through the sort of history of fuels at one point. Starting with, leaded petrol. Now, leaded petrol had obviously lead in it, which was very bad for people.
Yeah.
And then it moved on to unleaded petrol. Was it Benzes? Is it Benz? I'm trying to think. Benzene, is that what's in it? Which is also very bad for people. And then we got to diesel, which we all know the history of diesel now, don't we, really?
Well, diesel's given a bit of a bad press.
Okay.
I think modern day diesel cars are actually pretty good, but the press is bad, so everyone starts shifting across.
Is it correct that there's essentially the diesel cars are actually cleaner to run than some of the old petrol cars?
Oh yeah,
yes.
Definitely. The
yes,
newer
that
diesels,
is a fact.
Yeah. And I think even modern statistics or even recent statistics show that as people have transferred across from diesel into petrol because of the bad press, then actually some of the emission side of things has actually gone up. So it's not all bad. It just depends on what people. If you've got long journeys, then a diesel is a new diesel, should I say, is a good thing still to have.
And I think it also depends, doesn't it, whether you're in a built-up urban area or the countryside. I think diesel in cities with the particulates is particularly bad, and petrol is possibly better.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the ideal position for electric is in built-up areas, in cities, when you've got short journeys. You know, and obviously nowadays with stop-start technology, a lot of the engines turn off. But warm days like we're having at the moment, everyone's running air conditioning, the engine's going to be running to keep up with the demand. But, you know, with electric, the demand is so small, the battery can handle it. So, you know, it's great for those. It's just the fact that it's still a second car for most people, because you're still going to want to go the distances. You know, we talked earlier about where people were travelling from, and you think about that in terms of the electric side of things and go, well, could I travel here and back on a single charge? Most cars can now, but 3 years ago some of them couldn't.
Yeah.
So.
But before we get into all the electric stuff, I was going to, so hybrids.
Yep.
An engine and a battery.
Yep.
So do we have twice the problems with those in a way? The fact that you've got a battery you've got to do something with, and an engine you have to do something with, or were they a good thing in there? They got us to where we are.
Well, I think they're still the stepping stone that we're taking. I mean, we've developed our own range extender, which is there as it's not driving the wheels, it's there to charge the battery, so it gets you out of trouble and it extends your mileage. So most manufacturers now will offer a hybrid to people, so they can do maybe 15 to, like the i3, maybe 90 miles on electric, but then they have a small fuel tank and a little onboard engine which will equally take them much, much further. So hybrid for me is really that transition for people to get comfortable with the crossover in technology, plus the charging infrastructure is just not there at the moment for us to be comfortable that when you want to take a longer journey that you can do it on pure electric. So, you know, even in a Tesla, which has a fast charge, you know, it will still be half an hour, 45 minutes stood, plugged in, to get a decent level of charge at the motorway stops. Yes. Yeah, so for me, hybrid is still
cups of tea while you're waiting.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're all impatient, so we all want to move on. So.
Yeah. So what I'm curious about the other alternatives we have. So I think we talked at one point about solar cars, which is obviously never going to happen because
you just can't keep up.
There's too much weight. Too much weight.
You can't capture enough energy fast enough.
Right.
So the way that you consume energy when you're driving is significant versus what you can recover. So even in a hybrid, if you're a range extended electric car, it will try and keep up with your performance. But if you were driving on a motorway, say, you might use 35 kilowatts of energy approximately, travelling at 70 miles an hour depending on the drag of the car. Beyond that, the car's either got to limit you or whatever you've got on board is not going to keep up. So it's
so it's a long-term solution. It's a nice idea. Yeah.
We've got a way to go.
We've got a way to go. So, I mean, I'm trying to think of the other alternatives. Fuel cells, I think we talked about, was driving a bomb, wasn't it, at one point?
Yeah, I mean, some of the manufacturers are still pushing hydrogen. Hydrogen still has a battery system on board because everything is electric drive. Hydrogen is just used to convert via a fuel cell into electricity to charge the battery, but
a long way off.
Or certain Japanese manufacturers, they believe in it, but there's quite fuel cells are expensive. The hydrogen refinement is still a complicated process, so possibly, but as you say, it's We've all got used to petrol, and we kind of don't worry about it, don't think it's dangerous anymore, but it's obviously a very flammable fuel. But sat on a big tank of hydrogen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, big bomb.
No, quite. No, well, I think what one of the things that I was concerned about it during the research that I was doing was that I jumped into it thinking, "Yay, great electric cars!" It's something that I could really believe in, that would sit with my practice. And I'm not saying I don't believe in them at all. It seemed to me that we were leapfrogging in a way we've gone from petrol to unleaded to diesel to that, and it is not a long-term solution necessarily until we sort out the batteries, is it? The motors are fine, I suppose, because and then you get into the raw components of batteries and recycling of batteries and so on. I think I read recently that Chile has something like 40% of the lithium in the world in mines that they haven't signed. I'm not sure who owns them yet. I don't think they've started mining, but of course people will be anxious to start getting the lithium out. And even when you get the lithium out, I understand that there are different recycling processes that people use so it's not really a standard practice, and it would be great to have a standard practice at least, wouldn't it, where you could take the lithium, because some people said that I've looked at didn't even want to use recycled lithium. They wanted to use first-hand lithium, and I think we will exhaust it in the world by 2050 if we don't recycle it. And so that's the electric car we've thrown all this interest into, and you get to a point and it's like, what do you do now?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of work going on in battery technology and different chemistries, but it's complex.
I mean, that's the technology we need to be looking at, is it? The battery technology more than anything.
Yeah, which is, although it's been going on significantly over the last 10 plus years, it's fairly slow. It's the energy density of things has improved, but the chemistry down at that level is still pretty much the same. And some of the ones that are coming through now are obviously a little bit more volatile, so then there's they need a bit more test work before they're safe.
So have you seen a surge in interest now that more people into electric, bigger manufacturers can see there's a chance to make some money, or recyclers are seeing there's a chance to make some? Everyone's looking at the options now.
There's certain, for manufacturers, in terms of vehicle manufacturers, there's definitely not a chance to make money, because they probably lose money on every car they're selling at the moment, because batteries are expensive, slow to produce still, they're big, they're heavy, so then that works a negative against you. So but in terms of for smaller businesses like ours, then there's great opportunities, because there's lots of interest, not just in road cars, but buses, off-highway applications, marine applications. There's loads of things. Everything nowadays is, legislation's driving us that way. Press is driving people that way, because they all think they need to be doing this. So, and to actually experience electric drive is really good. It's really pleasant as a driving experience.
It's very fast, isn't it? Acceleration.
Yeah, good acceleration. I mean, I like noise, but to actually
you could put
drive
a muffler
electric
on the back, and play a tune through it or something.
Yeah, but it's good. It's good. But yeah, there's, like you say, as you dig deeper into it, the challenges are significant.
Which is where I got to with our talks about how do I produce a piece of work that's clear and definitive in a way, and that's where there's this cloud of confusion in the technology.
There's a quote I found I thought might be useful. It's by a physicist called Dr. Holger Muller, and he says a physicist is like a drunk looking for his keys under a lamppost. He doesn't know where they are, but it makes more sense to look in the light than in the dark. And then the suggestion is that a physicist might also bump into an artist looking for his keys, but the artist might be looking in the dark. So I don't know what you two might think about that, whether you recognise anything in that.
Looking into the dark. Well, I just think we look. Yes, I think one of the roles of artists is that they. I think I've done this all my life as well. Is that you break everything down you pull everything apart to basics, and then you try and rebuild it. And in that rebuilding process, you try and find an idea, a spark to make a piece of work. So if that's the dark, then perhaps that's kind of my process, I think. Just trying to understand and then to produce something. And this has been particularly difficult.
Yeah.
You know, well, I mean, it's not the fact that we didn't get it right. It's the fact that there's no clear message from government. There's no, you know, wouldn't it be great if in the world that they can't agree on anything at the moment. But I mean, if there was a way to, you know, just formulate a policy that this is what we're going to do. We're going to use these materials. We're going to recycle these materials, and have a cleaner environment. Because as it stands, it's not a particularly good process. I think one of the other facts that I looked up that was that I think that if we take up electric cars in this country by something like either, I don't know, 2025, 2040, probably 2040, there'll be 30 million electric cars in this country. And that puts another strain of, we have to produce another 20%, 25% of power on our national grid every day. So where does that power come from? We're moving into what we think is green technology. So we're going to burn coal to make that power. People aren't very keen on wind. Will it do enough?
Or
so
nuclear.
What do you do? Sorry?
People don't like nuclear. So
Well, I mean, in fact, NASA at the minute, NASA making a small battery, apparently, that might be suitable to power cars.
yeah.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Of course you can.
With reference to if there's enough electricity, I work for Culham Centre for Fusion Energy.
Okay.
So we're doing the research for fusion as being a renewable energy source, and there are billions of euros being put into development. So then building the next generation reactor in Cadarache, which is 28 billion and rising. We're working on contracts to produce the first demonstration fusion reactor. So I think at the moment it's on the drawing board, but you're probably looking at another 30 years.
The technology works.
The principle works. It's the nuts and bolts to get right. And I say that it's quite easy to say that. I mean, they are huge, but in theory it works. So it is doable. It's just financial commitment. But the technology is that difficult that you need an international task force to do it. You couldn't ask a utility company to make one.
Yeah.
You couldn't even ask a country to make one.
Would you still need batteries with fusion? I mean, how do you transfer the power?
Fusion, at the moment, the principle would be it replaces a coal-fired power station or a nuclear power station.
Oh, it's it. Sorry, right. Yeah.
So in theory, you wouldn't need as many, but they are very, very expensive.
Right.
But they are clean and safe, and the amount of fuel you need is tiny. Tritium and deuterium, which are readily available. So, I mean, I work, you know, there's 1,000 people on the site that I work for. They've been working there for 40 years on the fusion. And like I say, it's now advanced much further. And ITER, the International Thermonuclear Reactor, has come a long way. It's about halfway complete, and it is vast as an infrastructure.
So this still taps into the national grid as such?
In theory,
and you would
yes.
still then charge your car
Yes.
from,
Yeah.
so you still have lithium
It's
and you cobalt.
in essence, it is a sun in a box. So we basically have a sun that burns inside a box.
Yeah.
But that would be a lot cleaner, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hell of a lot cleaner.
So
Because something I picked up today on the news this morning, talking about the temperatures we're now having, it was that
since, I'm trying to think, since the industrial age, something like that, the temperature in the world has gone up 1 degree, then we're going up something like 0.2 of a degree every decade, and once we reach 2 more degrees, basically the ice caps and forests and things that are holding onto the carbon, they will then start to give off their carbon as well, and it's more. So it is a race against time, in a way. We have to carry on the way we even think we.
There's an awful lot of potential behind solar and wind, and if you want to support the population that we have now, you're looking at fusion.
Right.
If we don't get it to work, then solar and wind would not be
exactly.
enough.
So, is there momentum to do that? Do you think, or is that?
It's growing. A lot of it is based on commercial companies being interested. So it's been government funded internationally for many, many years. But it's surprising how many people. I mean, it's in Oxford. It's the reactor is just outside Abingdon. And we hold the record for the hottest temperatures in the galaxy at 350 million degrees, and that's not a small. That's a big space as well, and nobody knows it's there.
Can I come and see it?
Yeah, yes, you can actually. Yeah, the next opening evening is the 12th of September. The interesting thing is with the start of ITER, the next generation, the next step, commercial companies have had the opportunity to bid because the funding is based on the different countries get to build a certain part. So it's a massive collaboration between all these different 20 odd countries. So now the commercial companies are starting to build bits of equipment that have never been built before. I mean, there's nothing that's conventional. It's all very bespoke.
Very exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So now commercial companies are getting interested. It's boosting their economy. It's pushing technology a lot quicker than conventional. You know, sort of reinventing the wheel, as in making power stations more efficient, is useful. But when things like this come along, it's a bit like with Tesla. Suddenly, you sort of break through a barrier. And technology jumps quite rapidly.
So do you get the interest in funding like CERN, say, or is it not that big yet, or is it bigger than that?
Oh, it's much bigger.
It's much bigger than that. Right, okay. Yeah, that's my ignorance.
I mean, our budget's about 100 million a year, but that's quite small, as ITER at the moment projected costs are over 28 billion to finish the project.
But you said private companies. I mean, one of the things is, isn't it, that if you, for example, take, not picking on them, say the American population, and they produce, is it something like 20% of the world's emissions against 7% of the world's population? It's about education, what I was going to get onto. But if you're trying to educate people, or do you just do what you're doing and say you're never going to educate?
Our carbon emissions in the UK have dropped since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution by 92%. America's dropped by 90%. You'll actually be quite surprised at how much America are doing. It's what you see in the media. You know, we all listen to the media and we take it on board. But the actual reality is somewhat different. I mean, if I look at the media, you sort of look at America as sort of the bad, you know, it's like, oh yeah, they're not doing what they need to do, but they're actually doing an awful lot.
Right.
And they're just behind us in reducing carbon emissions. And it's like saying it's in the 90%. They're now looking at, because a lot of it's to do with coal, as one of the biggest producers of carbon, but they're now sort of using a microscope to look at gas, oil, as carbon emissions. So, which is another story.
So the thing is, why don't governments buy into this?
I think it's.
I mean, it's in their interest, surely.
It's a balance, because you either want an economy that, you know, designs things and then sells them and makes money, and you have an industry, or you get driven by the government, and companies don't like that. They want the freedom. So
are there big grants from government to assist in this?
Well, the fusion technology is funded predominantly by Europe. And obviously the money that they bring into the project then gets distributed with commercial companies, and then they build the parts. But it's a government-funded project at the moment. But it's in its infancy. So once commercial companies know that they can build one and in theory make money, then they will take over. But that's always been like that. You know,
I think that's 30 years away to make the first one, or 30 years away that...
I think that it's all a bit pie in the sky at the moment, but I think 30 years would be the first, which is demo, which is a demonstration that a fusion reactor can run and produce power. So
very complicated to build.
Extremely.
Right.
Extremely complicated to build.
Right. So if we were going to depend on them in the world, to say, you know, we're talking 60 years away?
Well, I mean, ITER is incredibly complicated because it's still an experiment. So there's a huge amount of diagnostics. You know, most of it is basically examining what they're trying to do.
Yes.
Demo will have all that script out. So it will just be the bare minimum of what you need to produce electricity. So maybe not so complicated.
Right. It's time.
Yeah.
We haven't got time. Is it this relationship between technology and human beings? I think is fascinating because it's what we want. We want the solution, don't we? We want the thing that's going to enable us to just keep behaving the way we behave. So I'm a psychologist by background, and kind of when you start to think, I think what you were alluding to, Tim, was kind of
changing
consumptive
habits.
behaviours, actually, and thinking, you know, that's what we need to address immediately, starting now, even before that technology is available. So it's kind of both
we would need to, wouldn't we? Just be, you know, even to sort of, I don't think we're going to slow it down in the short term, and it's just stabilising where we are. I mean, I don't know what the facts. Obviously, I'm talking tonight. My research bits I've gleaned here and there and so on, but we do have to work up now and then think of the long term. There's midterms and all sorts of stages, aren't there?
It's a double-edged sword, because if fusion works, you're basically on the cusp of another industrial revolution. Because if you've got almost cheap, limitless energy, people are going to want to start building again. So you've got clean energy, great, but then you've got aluminium, steel production.
the rest of the earth to think about.
Yeah. I mean,
just leaving the lights on the night wouldn't be a problem anymore.
No.
I think in the end you've got to ask yourself what kind of world do we want to live in. You know, what are we pursuing? An ideal, or are we pursuing something that's good for us? And two don't marry in a minute.
I think one of the biggest questions that seems to be coming up recently, and coming back to the climate and environment, is whatever we do needs to be sustainable. You know, we only have a certain amount of resource, but we're potentially going to use more than what's available. So going back to the electric cars, and you know, it's which one's more sustainable? Is it replacing all the cars in the world with electric cars?
Well, that's that. Yes.
Yeah, which would probably, the Earth probably couldn't support that amount of raw material and energy required. Or do you run with what you've got and try and change what you've got? Or do you tell people that you can't?
But it's even more than sustainability now, isn't it? Because we actually need to be in a regenerative
phase
essentially. To regenerate everything we've already destroyed.
I think there's a phase shift coming anyway with, you know, younger people have got a very different view on things in comparison to us. You know, and as you said, the cars are a commodity. All that generally, youngsters, there's not too many I know that are looking at saying, "Oh, I'm getting really excited because I'm going to get my driving license," because everything else is really expensive, insurance. All they want to do is say, "Oh, well, I want to go from there to there. I don't really care how I get there, as as long as I can use my phone when I'm doing it. So it's, you know, there's a phase shift, and I think how we use vehicles or transportation is going to change, really.
I think we shared the same article. It's called what will end big oil or something like that. And
Yes.
it's basically, electric cars have less parts, so I think this is correct.
Yeah.
They have less parts, so they'll last longer. So the cost of a car will come down.
Yeah,
That mixed with automation and the attitudes you were describing, if you need to get from A to B and use your phone, well, you might as well get an Uber. And if it's not so much about owning a car, it's about...
That's
using a
right.
car.
That's changing habits, isn't it?
Yeah.
The whole idea of the dial a car, where it just comes to your doorstep and drives you off a driverless car that just acts as a taxi driver.
It sounds really familiar to the rural bus that they're getting rid of.
Yes.
And I was having a conversation actually with my landlord in my local pub, and we were talking about the shop that I do, so I do a lot of virtual reality. And we were talking about cars and moving around, and he sort of said, I don't know whether it was naivety or he was actually had some sort of insight, but he said, if you've got a virtual world, you don't need. If you want to go and talk to somebody, just go and meet them in a virtual world. You know, it's like it's only if you need to interact with the physical world at the other end. And that was quite profound. That was like, you know, I mean, that would just change everything. But you sort of think, well, sort of, you know, in a sort of fuzzy logic way, you're sort of making a point.
Well, I think when the new train line was talked about coming up the East Coast to Birmingham and so on, the amount of money it was costing, someone said, well, we've had the industrial revolution, we had steam, we've had cars, and now it's internet, really. That putting it into trains, if you actually increased the service we had, we wouldn't have to travel to work, to meetings, to the virtual world, slightly.
Well, they were asking for another 43 billion
To do that.
to finish the project. Oh, the train project.
Right.
If you put that
Into his fusion, it's a start, isn't it?
would that reduce the time substantially?
Potentially, yeah.
I mean, it's twice the budget you've got already. European budget.
Yeah, well, there was a comment, I don't know whether it's still valid. So we spend more on ringtones than we do on fusion research. You know, and that's, you know,
Not surprised.
like, you know, populations, millions, it's quite easy to spend multiple millions. But yeah, again, it's sort of knowing that it's there, and you know they're trying to raise the profile.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to say about the sort of manufacturing side was something that I was reading quite recently. They were sort of saying that we might, if it's mass production, we may need big factories. But if it comes down to sort of smaller production, with the advancement in 3D printing and sintering and sort of smaller CNC machines, that people can actually manufacture from home in smaller groups. So,
I see.
Yeah.
Right.
So they said potentially we're on the cusp of quite a big change. So you wouldn't get, you know, huge factories. I mean, one of the things about cars was there's a guy in America that 3D prints them, and it's in its infancy. And he said, when you go to your car showroom, you won't buy the car.
By the plan.
Well, they'll just 3D print it,
Oh, right, okay.
and then you'll drive it away. And if
Yeah.
you want to modify it, you can modify it.
Yes.
So the car showroom wouldn't be the showroom; it would be the factory.
Yeah.
And all you do is from very local suppliers, bring in the parts, electric motors, batteries, which, you know, that removes a colossal industry. You know, the whole automotive industry, steel, aluminium, all those sort of things, they'd be gone.
But in the end, do you not think that, you know, a lot of this comes back to, I hate to use the word education, but to try and spell out, I'm not sure that a lot of it is overlooked, because I think that very often people don't care, or do they not know?
I think the economy is driven by making a profit, and we're all, in our way, a bit of a slave to that. You know, I've got to go to work and I've got to make money, and I've got very little sway in how things are done. If I had the ability to work from home and manufacture from home, I'd do that. At the moment, the technology's not there yet, or it is available, but it's too expensive.
Yeah, I mean, more people are starting to look to work from home, and certainly a number of our employees will work from home a number of days a week. It suits their family circumstances, and also for us as a business, if somebody comes to work, that's a space that we need to provide for them, and facilities we need to provide for them. Whereas if they can work remotely, then that's actually not a bad thing for us as a business. So.
The restriction's always been that working from home, a lot of it has to be based on digital information.
Yeah.
CAD work, which you can easily do now. The idea potentially in the future is you can manufacture from home. So you wouldn't need that central hub. People could.
But you'll still need the deliveries or the pickups to bring it to another centre where it's
essentially
essential.
yes. But then you could, somebody else could be concentrating on one thing. And you find your own group.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, following that along, I mean, is it better to, for example, which is a declining area, have local shops that you go to buy your products, or the malls out of town, or to buy from Amazon and have a van bring it to your door? I mean, all that someone somewhere must have done the calculations that one of those scenarios is better than another. I don't know.
I think it's led by the technology. All the companies want to make money. At the moment, the technology means that this is the best way to do it. If in 10 years' time that technology's changed, then so will the economy and how things are done. And things like Amazon may die out. They just might not be needed. If say 70% of the things that you require for home can be all manufactured locally because people have got the technology at home, then the distribution's tiny.
What we talked about, the car industry, it may not be Ford, Jaguar, Land Rover, it might be Apple, Facebook, whoever, Tesla, absolutely. Different people making cars.
Yeah, with less, brand loyalty nowadays for most of the younger generation is around technology-driven things, so Apple being probably the biggest one.
I think that's easily lost though. I mean, you only have to look at Facebook.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, if they're not careful, it's
that comes down to corporate identity, doesn't it? And the thing about our loyalty, and it's very applicable.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But it's
I don't
if you
think
fix
that's
in
the way
both ways,
of
so
measuring
if
how
they invest in something exciting and potentially clients say they
Well, they were saying recently that is it Apple because they can't push the technology fast enough, so that the next generation and the next generation, they're not quite. The acceleration is not as much as it
Because
was.
we buy into it at different rates, you mean?
No, well, what they were saying is their solution to that is to just put the price up.
Yeah.
Oh, they've done that recently, haven't they?
Yeah.
They've increased their sales because they've put
Well,
the price up.
they
They sold
got
less,
to
but it cost
potentially 1 trillion.
1 trillion.
Yeah. But the thing is they're not giving you more; they're giving you less because the technology can't keep up. But their way of coping with that is, well, we're just going to put the price up.
Would 1 trillion sort your fusion problem out? Well, just going to throw it out there. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's time for people to step up.
A fusion engine for a car.
Yeah.
There we are.
There we are. a trillion would probably do that.
Everyone's talking about money, and it's not just about money. It's
not.
about ideas, and going back to education, it's about breeding or creating the next generation of creative thinkers and engineers. None of this is going to happen without young people who are actually inspired enough to want to work in the industry.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big problems we've got.
That was very interesting. I don't know if you listened a couple of days ago. I think it's Mariella Frost-Trop was on a programme, and she was talking about creativity in schools, and that the jobs that most of us are doing, unless they're creative, won't have much sway. Exactly. We need creative kids to make creative ideas, to find creative solutions. Yeah.
That's not what we're teaching.
No.
That's wiped out of the curriculum.
I mean, some of the interesting ideas Simon and I talked about, which we haven't discussed yet, was, for example, if you drive home in your electric car and it's got 75% of the charge left in it, and you plug it in to charge it, but you actually don't need that charge to the following day, 12 hours away, whatever it is, and the local town or city needs the power because there's an emergency in a hospital or whatever it is, it can be connected through the grid. Someone else can use it, so it's just a storage capacity. I think concepts like that are interesting.
Well, I mean, those things are happening
Well,
now, really. So, you know, that's already there. Yeah.
Birmingham New Street has one.
Yeah.
Some of the houses.
What,
Yeah, it's just-
from the electric cars?
No,
from the
it's,
from the
from
train.
gas station.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So they can grid balance, basically.
So
It's sharing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think we should mention some of these interesting. I know you've got lots of notes. Do you want to?
Well, I have one. I have one really off the wall idea that you know, half our globe, half of it's in dark and half of it's in light. If there was a way to generate electricity in the half that's using, I would say solar now because I don't know any better. And that is somehow we have these wonderful cables that go under the sea or go wherever they go, and it can be sent round to other countries to power their lights at night, their street lamps and so on. It's another way of sharing electricity. I'll throw that out there. You're going to kill it.
No. But I think no.
I mean, it's just big ideas.
Yeah. There was an interesting chart I saw quite recently, and they were looking at energy usage globally. And energy usage globally has increased steadily through the Industrial Revolution and one time. But basically what it was showing was it spiked dramatically. So our energy consumption globally has gone through the roof. And it started in the year 2000.
What was designed in the
iPhone?
iPhone?
A lot of the third world countries now are consuming electricity, and their populations are much bigger than ours. And they're a little bit behind the curve on technology, and you know they do things in maybe not as environmental way. But
I think they're allowed to get up running.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, because they were basically stating that if we don't do something about it, we will consume more resource than the Earth's got to give by 2050.
And we already massively are in the Western society.
Yeah.
So then it becomes a question of power, actually, doesn't it?
It's who's got the geopolitics now.
Yeah.
Stop
It's like the lithium. Who owns the lithium?
Yeah, and yes, exactly. Yeah, who's going to have the mining rights for that? And that goes back again to the recycling. I did hear of a company in Canada, I think, talking about recycling, that froze batteries down to something like minus 300 degrees, shredded them, and somehow separated out the components. But you know, they can. These processes are probably quite slow at this stage, and you need to put it into the industrial level to keep up with the cars. If you thought about just 13 million cars in this country, and there's a lot of batteries, aren't there?
Yeah.
In a battery.
Yeah. I mean, most of the car batteries, so manufacturers will issue them with a sort of 8 to 10 year life, and then after that they'll probably get consumed in second life, where you might put them in your home, or you might bury them in the ground and use them for buildings, because the energy consumption is low enough, or if the capacity is down a little bit, it doesn't matter. So they have a second life.
What is the life? 8 to 10 years?
That's what an automotive manufacturer would warrant the battery for. So obviously the degradation is going to happen over that, and like anything, any battery that we use in anything these days, it depends on how you use.
So we have 8 to 10 years of the first generation of electric cars in a way before those batteries need to be recycled for the next term to take off.
Yeah.
If it all gets used up, all the lithium in the first lot.
The problem is nowadays most or a lot of people turn their car over every 3 years. So what happens then? How does that all work? And where do those in the second-hand market? And it's just it's a different environment to operate in. But with all of the uncertainty and challenges create opportunities. So it comes back to making sure that young engineers or scientists are given enough visibility for them to get excited about going into areas. I know things like the rail industry really struggle because it's not seen as a sort of a sexy environment, if you like. If you take
Going on a train.
motorsport, yeah,
I love trains.
get into motorsport versus work in the rail industry. That's
I work in the rail industry.
yeah, and
Sexy.
yeah, and
Yeah, this year is the first time I've been on a TGV, and I went from south of France to Paris, and the journey was 2 hours 40 minutes, and we went 700 kilometres. It's just
Yeah.
incredible. So it was 200 miles an hour we were doing, and the price was reasonable.
Yeah.
And we got home. We got the train back to King's Cross, and then we got the train from King's Cross to King's Lynn, and it stopped halfway home because the train ahead of it had broken down, and we crawled along for an hour and a half or so, and then they said, can everyone in the back of the train move to the front of the train because the toilets are broken in the back. Now I would talk about investing money in trains. I think absolutely.
yeah. But as you're
But-
saying,
but-
there's technology there, but people don't. It doesn't register
No,
because it's not
No.
visible enough.
but we're behind the curve on that as well, aren't
Yeah.
we? We get into
We're
trains.
ahead of the curve though, because
We were.
it's Victorian infrastructure.
Yes.
And that's what you've got in Kingsley.
Yes.
Your old signals and stuff. So,
But the investment hasn't been there either, has it?
well, it has since Network Rail we've been investing lots.
Right.
I am biased, though, yeah.
Well,
But it does cost money, and you can't have improved capacity, increased journey times, safety, reliability, and cheap tickets.
Yeah.
how are the
Something-
French and the Germans?
Well, the French and
Governments.
the Germans haven't been privatised into all little bits and
Right.
blame Margaret Thatcher and the Conservatives.
Happy to. Yeah. Yeah.
That was almost a note to end on, but I don't think
Was
we
it?
should end on anything
No, I
else
don't
on
think we
that.
should end on that.
No.
I have something here that what we have to be doing. So it says here, so not only are we going to have to stop burning fossil fuels by the middle of this century, we're going to have to get very busy with planting trees, protecting forests, working out how to block the sun's rays, and developing machines to suck carbon out of the air. That's part of the article whereby if it goes up 2 degrees more, but then you want incentives, don't you, from governments to do this as well. Leadership, the right leadership. Yeah.
I'd have to say
They
that
don't even support solar and wind farms, so they're not really
No,
supportive of any of these things.
no.
I have to say in our industry, the government actually puts a lot of grants and incentives into technology around the low carbon environment, especially on automotive, because it's a big part of the UK, of our industry, of our history. So we benefit from support from UK government on projects to develop new technologies, and especially for small businesses, it's great.
Do they need to do that now? Because in order to reduce the country's emissions, diesel got hit. We were all encouraged to get into diesel, weren't we, at one point, because
Yep.
it was going to be, and now it isn't. And in order to reduce the country's emissions, what else are they going to do? They can put money into companies like yours. I mean, the technology is great.
Yeah, but I think it's about going back to what we're good at in the UK.
We are good at that stuff.
And
yes.
we're good early stage innovators. We're not big
Comes back to
manufacturers.
creativity.
Yeah, we need to generate intellectual property, be able to license that to bigger countries that are better at mass market manufacture than we are. But if the technology hub
Yes,
still comes back to the UK, then that's good. And I think,
it is.
looking forward, maybe we'll be standing alone a bit more. So we need to have some strong roots in order to be able to make sure industry comes back to the UK.
Yeah.
Question. There are rumours, or some people say that the economic model of growth, which is what we've had for a few decades now, is broken, or it's coming to an end. So what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know really. I mean,
We missed the question.
It's completely broken.
yeah.
Yeah.
in terms of the current economic model, to suppose that continuous economic growth is not only necessary but desirable, or desirable but necessary. And lots of people would say absolutely it isn't. And neither does it make us happy, because we know the connection with mental ill health that comes from that society. So one of the things that's been going through my mind as everybody's been talking is what is the kind of prevalent narrative in society and who's holding that. And actually it's about consumption, because we're willing to be led by corporations rather than led by responsible governments.
We're buying happiness.
Yeah, because actually it's still money based, which is to your point. So.
I mean, until we stop following, there was somebody made a comment. They said, like a child consumes. You know, they whatever you give them, they'll take it, and they put that analogy to our ability to just consume. The government say, well, we need to grow, and somebody basically said, well, when do we mature? Because when you mature, you level off. You don't consume anymore. But as globally, we've never done that. We just keep consuming. And if one country is better at growth, another country suffers because there's only finite resource. So, you know, if America are doing well, somebody else is probably in poverty.
Well, that's always the case.
Yeah. So the premise that we stop growing and mature as a globally, and stop consuming more than what we have, then at that point we can start coming up with proper solutions to climate change, standard of health and living.
That comes earlier. I was making a point about education. I mean, I can't really see that happening, because we are constantly wanting, we're constantly supplied, and objects, things that we don't necessarily need, but it keeps, somehow we're told it keeps the world going. But all that emphasis could be, all that marketing to sell us things could be on environmental issues, perhaps more.
Low carbon living.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
But all the companies want to do is make money.
Of course.
The big market forces, that they're not interested in anything else.
Yes. Yeah.
But one of the interesting things, going back to the technology that may allow people to manufacture at home, that would potentially change things, because they would have no control over that. You know, if there were printers available that were printing amazing things, they're not here now, whether they ever turn up or not, I don't know. But yeah, they've got no control, because there's going to be a company saying, well, there's a demand here, we're going to make them. And people as end users, we're going to use them. And then suddenly you're taking away from the power, the central power of big organisations.
There's also, you know, that's one level of it, but there's also the more kind of home consumer level where you can print a pair of shoes. You know, you can actually, you get a basic model for a pair of shoes that the pair of shoes effectively has to do a certain thing, with a knife and fork or whatever. But you can alter that model and print your own, and then you remove everything out of that.
You need to be happy with that when you've done it, don't you?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, I would be, but I mean, that's the thing, isn't it?
But
some people might not, because they like their design labels, etc.
Yes.
So there's, you know, there's lots of things going on. Health and safety would be an absolute nightmare, because then you know what to tick the box and say, well, you're not going to.
Shoes.
Yeah, you're not going to break your neck there, and you say, hey, it's rescue hat. We might have to just learn how to take those risks.
Take risks.
Yeah.
But I suppose the thing is if that economic model was sustainable, that should be the driving factor. Because, you know, you're not using too much resource, you know, it can be regenerated or renewed, whereas the current economic model is not sustainable.
No.
It will eventually run out.
Yes.
I did see something a few months ago about some libraries, which are sadly mostly closing, but one of them had a good idea to be a little hub, and it was going to have 3D printers there, and people could come and use it as like a little startup hub.
Yeah.
So we should all get down to our local library.
There is a name for it, and the name escapes me, but it's like a new economic model, distribution production or something. And it's this ability that, in theory, you can either make your own stuff just for you, you know, without having to buy it in, or you can make things and then distribute them yourself.
It's amazing what comes around, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, your 3D printer man on the corner in each village or in each neighbourhood is basically the village blacksmith.
Yes,
But
well
just
there
with
you
a
are.
different material.
Yes.
You know.
But why not?
Yeah.
You go and you say, I want a spanner that will unlock this or whatever, and he'll make you exactly what you want, whatever size you want, no fuss, no bother.
That's the job, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
One of my favourite things is finding people to make things for me.
Yeah.
Using crafts, whatever they are. Help people out to do things.
Usually when we have these kind of discussions, the previous one was Art and Energy, and I was an artist, and she was the first artist, Ellie Harrison, to write her own environmental policy for herself, which she breached, and that's her work, was struggling with that. And that can be quite a depressing conversation. You know, you can't get much more depressing than the potential end of the world. But actually I think artists and engineers, I think there seems to be, not artists or engineers, it seems to be artists and engineers together. It always feels like quite a positive, optimistic.
There are a couple of talks in Oxford, St Martin's College, and they do a lot of analysis, global and economic, and they're working on new economic models that are sustainable, and they're trying to sell this new idea to GA Summit, as a
7
new
or 8.
Yeah,
That's part of the topic we should have been talking about this evening, isn't it?
Yeah. So they are working on it, and they've actually found cities that they couldn't. They were trying to run the experiment. There's like a mathematical formula globally, and they couldn't do it. But so they did it per city, and Vietnam turned out to be a city that has a very balanced education, standard of living, food, transport, and it doesn't consume any more resources than what it's got available. And it's completely by accident that they discovered Vietnam fulfills this criteria. London was the worst. London was the most consuming city there is. So very high standard of living, all those, but the amount of consumption was way above what was ever be sustainable.
Yeah.
So that they are working on it, and they are trying to push this agenda globally.
Right, leave it with some optimism.
Yeah.
Well, the optimism, I was going to ask you, I've never been in an electric car. Did you plug yours in today? And
Well, we've got to stop.
We've got to stop on the way home. My husband didn't leave enough charge in it.
well, you just need a pub with a socket, don't you? Yes.
so how does that change when you plan to travel? That must change things dramatically. It's not just, I'm just going to get some petrol.
But interestingly,
away half an
More
hour to
thoughtful
charge.
about it.
There's one in Toaster.
If it was yes,
You should have said you could have come and plugged in at
I'm
Alton.
not sure if you had one.
Miles to find the charger rate, which is a bit.
It's quite
Sometimes there are
exciting to be
apps.
on the edge of whether you've got
There
those
is.
miles.
That's right.
They have them I was recently in Amsterdam, and they actually have a car sharing
Yep.
system, and it's a you sign up to an app, and then you just have a car that's near you. You drive it, you leave it somewhere,
Yeah.
plugged in or not plugged in, and then someone else signs into the app, and then they find it. And that's
Yeah.
quite a good way of
Which they do
travelling.
with bicycles, aren't they, as well?
Yeah.
Volvo and other
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's
phone things.
There's lots of stuff like that. But yeah, the charging infrastructure is just it's a bit of a minefield. And as you say, there's apps available. I think that was the first thing I did when I got my Tesla, even though it's got decent ranges, you end up downloading an app to know where all the charge points are that are local to you, and then you find out, oh, this one's got a different, it's got a different connector type, I can't plug in here.
That'll be Apple cars, that will.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need an adapter.
Yeah.
So
that's
do you get there and there's someone else using it? You have to wait for them to finish.
the apps tell
Like a
you.
busy
Yeah.
Whether they're in use or free or broken.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Do people who leave their car all day when it only takes 45 minutes, is that frowned upon? So you're using the space up continuously?
It is massively frowned upon. Yeah. Most people still do it, but it's still frowned upon. But
Aren't the government grants now to have one installed outside your home?
there are. Yeah, there's support for at-home charging.
I think the only restriction was that it's still first come, first served. You don't get...
Yeah,
you
just
know,
because you live there.
somebody else's part there.
It doesn't actually belong to
No.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a bit more dark in the codes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think race against time, lots of ways. We've got to wrap it up. So thanks Tim, thanks Simon for having Tim. At Delta.
Thanks, Simon.
No problem.
And also for Silverstone Park for hosting us. Our next discussion event is on the 11th of September, Art and Wellbeing. I thought for a while it was a completely different subject to this because we do jump around, but actually I can have the conversation tonight and it's not so far away. And that will be held in Kettering, or you can watch it online by our live stream, Martin. The artist is Philippos Tsitsopoulos and the London Arts and Health Forum Director Damien Hebron. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So now leaving. So I don't know how many of you came through.
I did.
the
That gate just there, yeah.
So the bollards will be.